I think I think machine learning is peaking very much. I really am seeing the same kind of thing I saw toward the end of symbolic AI. Now the academics have divided AI up into two parts: symbolic AI using symbols, rules, logic, and expert systems. That's symbolic, and then connectionist uses the artificial neural networks paradigm. So connectionist AI was having its heyday back in the mid to late 80s. And then when it really didn't produce AI, it didn't scale. You could always build a clever little system with 200 rules, and everybody said, "Oh, it's not true." But if you tried to do something real, like automate the analysis of 4,000 points from a spacecraft, you would end up with so many rules, it just didn't go. So everybody became disillusioned. But for a while, there was hype. All the big corporate companies were building AI centers, and they were building customized machines for expert systems, customized computers, hardware optimized for the tools and the techniques they had today. And money was flying around, and there was hype and irrational exuberance. Well, we're back to that. Since you talk about all these niche companies, you got to be AI, right? Now they call everything as AI. I've heard linear regression in an Excel spreadsheet is called machine learning because it's because it uses statistics, and therefore it's AI. But so all these companies have to have AI in their name or be AI or about AI. It's just like the .com. Put a .com on the end, you're in. Put AI in your name or in your business plan, you're in.
Right.
But recently, within the last year, I know Forbes did a study of European early stage companies, startups, small companies that were in the AI field. And they found that 40% of them didn't even use AI or didn't even use machine learning. They just said they did. So, that was the way it is again.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
And you've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Today we've got Bryant Cruse. He's on his third startup, and he's going to tell us his entire journey today. And his new startup doesn't quite call it artificial intelligence, so I'm super excited to learn more about his current startup, but I think we're going to have a good time today. How are you doing today, Bryant?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We're super excited to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
Before we learn about your current business, can you take us back? I think you said you started your first company in '89, your first startup. Can you take us back? Let us know a little bit about who Bryant is and what makes you an entrepreneur today.
Well, I think every entrepreneur has a different story and a different way of coming to it. For me, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. In fact, years later, after I had a couple of companies, my older brother came to me and said, I never saw you as such a risk taker. And I sat back and said, risk taker? I never thought of myself as a risk taker either. And yet, how did that happen? Well, for me, I'm kind of a problem solver. And sometimes I'm the kind of person that if you have a vision of a solution of something that you might be able to do, and that it could solve a serious problem or make the world a better place, then I find that very compelling. It kind of, the bigger the vision, the bigger the difference, the more it'll change the world, the more it sinks its teeth in, as it were, if you get that. So back in the 80s, I was a space systems engineer on the Hubble Space Telescope. And I kind of got a vision of, well, I should put it this way. I didn't like the way we were operating spacecraft. It seems to me we were just making science projects out of them. And my previous job, I did a Navy pilot. So I was on the operations contract to operate the Hubble Space Telescope, and I didn't like it. I like looking at numbers on screens like some kind of science project. So I thought, can we find a way to get the computers to do the number crunching and analyze the numbers and all these measurements coming down, thousands of points of measurements coming down from the telescope. So people are looking at these on screens, 26.2, 26.1, and trying to figure out what's going on. I thought that's crazy. So the only tools were the idea that we could use AI, what was then called expert systems, rule-based systems. It's early, like kind of the first wave, symbolic AI, if you know about that. So I jumped into that, and I got my employer, Lockheed. I was a subcontractor for NASA, Lockheed Missile Space Company. They sent me to an AI school. I got to build a prototype, and everyone said, that's really cool. But I quickly became frustrated because nobody really knew what to do with it. And both Lockheed and NASA had really big bureaucracies at that point. And so everybody's patting me on the back, but they weren't implementing it. They weren't going out and doing it. I get more and more frustrated about that. And one day I was at my reserve squadron, and one of my buddies there was an investment banker in New York. So why don't you start your own company? And I went, what? You can do that? And he said, yeah. You have to find some venture capitalists. I know some. Would you like to talk to them? Well, I mean, this was like the earth shifting under my feet. And once it became real to me that it was possible to start a company to solve my problem, to get out from under the corporate bureaucracy and maybe get out there and make things happen, there was no possibility that I could not try to do that.
Okay. So for you, it's more of a realization that this is even something I can do, that I'm allowed to do. And yes. that would have been, so this is in the late 80s, right? So the world was a quite different place. I find it super interesting that you were taking artificial intelligence classes in the late 80s. And today it's like at the tip of everybody's tongue. This is 30 years, 40 years in the making for where you're at today.
Well, it was then too, in a way. It's well known that AI goes through boom and bust cycles. So in those days, it was hot, not quite as frenzied as it is today, but still it was a big deal. Right. And all the big corporations were setting up AI centers, and Lockheed had set up one that was equivalent to a master's. And so everybody was really excited about AI. So they sent me out there for 6 months, equivalent to a master's on Palo Alto. The Stanford professors came up. So what happened though was rule-based expert systems as a technology didn't really scale. AI has always been hyped. Everybody was hyped. This is it. We're going to have talking machines. We're going to have everything. Rosie the robot. It's all here, and it didn't scale.
Right.
And my first company, we ran into the same problem.
Right.
And that was an interesting thing, though, and which is a good, I think, point for your audience, is in a sense, we didn't really solve the problem we were aiming at, but we were trying to solve a very critical real world problem, which was telemetry analysis. But in order to do it in those days, we had to write our own networking software, because AI then, as AI machine learning today, requires huge computational resources. Right. So in order to build a center or a system that people could use, we had to put the data interface on one big computer, the inference engine on another big computer, and the user interface on a third big computer. But there was no software in those days. We had to write our own software to communicate processes on the things. Well, when Expert Systems didn't pan out, that company went off and became a middleware company. And they eventually went on, were acquired, and my company went public. And today, a lot of the financial information out there in the network, the real-time stuff, goes over the bus. That started way back then when we were trying to solve telemetry problems. So one advice I have to anybody who's thinking about getting out there and starting a company, solve a real problem. Don't do it because you have a cool idea. Like, I'm going to start an AI company because AI is cool and lots of people are doing that. What problem do you think you can solve?
Well, and there's two different ways, and our last episode, we talked about this a lot. There's two different ways to solve problems. You can innovate or you can invent, right? And you were inventing new AI back in the 80s, but now it's been innovated. That original technology that you guys created has been innovated over and over and over to be what it is today for the company today, right? So
yeah, but sometimes you kind of reach a dead end to innovation. and you have to innovate. You have to invent something new.
Well, and then specifically where you were at, where you were trying to create artificial intelligence, and the networking wasn't where it is today, and the computing just wasn't where it is today, right? You could do, basic AI models on a single computer today, right? Just kick it up, pick up the software, and go.
It depends. It all depends on what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, you're not going to have a huge model, but you can have a small model with just a single computer today. And
but all the techniques they call AI are still hugely computationally expensive. Machine learning couldn't even get off the ground until we had supercomputers and giant data sets. Now, of course, they've refined that and they've scaled it back, but yes, neural networks could not get. They were around back in the 80s, but they couldn't get off the ground because they just required too much computational power. So when that changed, it opened up new opportunities. Again, it was an innovation. I mean, the invention had been there of artificial neural networks for a long time. Right. And then they did some major breakthroughs, innovations like backpropagation, things like that, which put it on the map just when the old sort of AI. But between the two, there was like the AI winter. Okay, that's once expert systems failed, you couldn't even use the word AI, which was interesting because when my first company went off to become a middleware company, I said, no, I'm trying to solve, I'm a space guy. I'm still trying to solve the telemetry problem.
Right.
So I started another company, which in that one, instead of being venture funded, we basically bootstrapped it by getting contracts that we could do to, do this problem and that problem. And we still tried to use expert systems for a while, but they failed. And we innovated a completely new approach, which worked very, very well.
So let's talk about that for a second. VC versus bootstrap. VC is where you go out and you get a group of people, one or multiple people, to invest in your company. You're selling them shares of your company. Bootstrapping is, hey, typically, I think the way I've done it is I can solve this problem for you, company A, hire me to do it, and then I create a custom solution for that company generally, and that might become a product or service later down the road.
That's basically it.
I'm using my customers' money to fund the project.
Exactly.
Yes, which is my favorite way to do it. It's harder, I think, to bootstrap than it is VC, but it's more rewarding in my opinion. And I've always just loved bootstrapping to see what I can create out of nothing or seemingly nothing, right?
But it depends on how big that first step is in terms of, in my second company, we did a little consulting, but then one of the first things, the first real contract we got to do was to build a launch control system for a space launch vehicle. Controlled everything. So it was a big first step. But again, there were contracts available. We managed to do it. If your first step requires a particle accelerator, you're probably not going to bootstrap it.
Right.
And that was the case, with our third company. It was such a big thing that we're doing that it take a lot more. It would have taken too long to try to bootstrap it. So.
Yeah, I think there's two things that you have to think about if you're trying to bootstrap. One is how fast you need the capital to get to where you want to go, and then two, if the barrier to entry is too low, then your idea can be taken from you before you really get it off the ground. So if you got to make a big splash quickly, because the tech isn't overcomplicated, you got to have the community. Then the VC money is a good way to go there too. So
but you have to understand. I'm sure you do, because this is what you talk about. But the VC environment, the investment environment for professional investment, has changed almost beyond recognition since my first company. In those days, it was still very much the Silicon Valley ideal of the small startup that's going to come up with an innovative new technology that was going to come and disrupt the industries. And there were, that's what VCs were supposed to do. They were supposed to look and find those folks and give them money, right? And I, believe it or not, it still even then wasn't easy. It took us a year to really, we got some VCs out of the box that did some seed work for us, but it took us a year to really get funded to get the larger money to really take off in that company. But over the years, and I think one of the reasons it's changed is with the rise of big tech, which they all started out as garage startups, but then they became so huge. And then with machine learning, it became about big tech, big data, supercomputers, large data sets. And it's kind of this culture of bigness now. What is considered the best company, the most valuable company is the one that's going to scale to be a unicorn because of the best number of users and data. And it's been harder and harder for anybody who comes out of the garage with an idea that comes out of left field to get venture funding, unless they're doing variations on a theme that everybody else is doing, because the investment community has gotten to be very much in some ways homogenized, syndicated.
Right.
I mean, even you go to something like AngelList, and it's really syndication now.
Yes.
It's a whole bunch of investors get together, and then once you do that, then they come up with principles and they come up with gates and ways of doing things. And if you don't fit, you don't fit.
Then you don't play. Right.
Yeah. So Peter Thiel wrote a book about that. You're probably familiar with that. 0 to 1.
0 to 1.
0 to 1 by legendary investor Peter Thiel, in which he laments. It's a good read, by the way. Not only I think any entrepreneur should read it, or aspiring entrepreneur.
Right.
And he said that he made the case that despite our proliferation of shiny gadgets, we're actually kind of living in a time of technological stagnation, because the truly innovative companies, which he called the 0 to 1 companies, who come out of left field, create something new and strange that no one's ever done before, they don't get funding. The 1 to 2, the 2 to 3, the 3 to 4, the refiners, as you called them, that's what VCs like today, because they've already got something proven.
Proof of concept built in.
They've got a proof of concept built in. It's just a matter of who has got what's your niche,
right?
What niche in machine learning, what's your data set, what's your algorithm, how is it different from those, and what's your angle? They like that, and they'll listen to that, but if you come up with something like we did at New Sapience, they have to sit down and be educated, and they have to really scratch their head and understand it, and that takes a lot of time and investment.
Yes.
And very
on both sides.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The entrepreneur has to educate them as well. Right. And the
in that VC world, and I've seen it change, and I see it changing all the time. What the world that I see today is that there's so many different kinds of VCs across the board, right? There's the micro VC all the way up to the big guys. In the world of the internet, we are living in a moment right now, late 2022, where the internet is a winner take most situation, right? Amazon, Google, they're taking the lion's share of the business, similar to computing did with IBM mainframes and all that stuff. And it keeps, it goes to the center and then it ebbs and flows. It keeps doing this kind of weird breathing situation. Do you think with AI, we're back to a situation where we're going into this, smaller niche companies having places to play in that game, at least for a while?
Well, yeah, they have been playing, but the way they play is they come up with a variation, a theme. They come up with their niche. They got to attract venture funding. The VCs pour money on them until one of the big 5 companies buys them. That's how it works. The big tech companies ending up bringing in the technology, but they buy it from the startups.
So is the roll up going to be faster with AI than it was with the .coms and real estate and everything else?
I think I think machine learning is peaking very much. I really am seeing the same kind of thing I saw toward the end of symbolic AI. Now the academics have divided AI up into 2 parts: symbolic AI using symbols, rules, logic, and expert systems. That's symbolic. And then connectionist uses the artificial neural networks paradigm. So connectionist AI was having its heyday back in the mid to late 80s. And then when it really didn't produce AI, it didn't scale. You could always build a clever little system with 200 rules, and everybody said, "Oh, it's not true." But if you tried to do something real, like automate the analysis of 4,000 points from a spacecraft, you would end up with so many rules you just couldn't. It just didn't go. So everybody became disillusioned. But for a while there was hype. All the big corporate companies were building AI centers, and they were building customized machines for expert systems, customized computers, hardware optimized for the tools and the techniques they had today. And money was flying around, and there was hype and irrational exuberance. Well, we're back to that. Since you talk about all these niche companies, you got to be AI, right? Now they call everything as AI. I've heard linear regression in an Excel spreadsheet is called machine learning because it's because it uses statistics, and therefore it's AI. But so all these companies have to have AI in their name, or be AI, or about AI. It's just like the .com. Put a .com on the end, you're in. Put AI in your name or in your business plan, you're in.
Right.
But recently, within the last year, I know Forbes did a study of European early stage companies, startups, small companies that were in the AI field, and they found that 40% of them didn't even use AI, or didn't even use machine learning. They just said they did. So that was the way it is again. And I'm
curious to hear your definition in describing the difference between AI and machine learning. What is the difference?
Well, AI, if you go back to the origin of the term, go back to the Dartmouth Conference of 1956, and in the original call for that conference, they described what they were talking about. That's where the term AI was coined, by the way.
Okay.
It was the first conference on AI, and they said what it was. They said this is based on the conjecture that no feature of intelligence, they meant human natural intelligence, that any feature of natural intelligence can be so precisely defined that it can be emulated in a computer. So by that definition, AI, as it has been practiced and pursued from now to then, should be called imitation intelligence. We're trying to imitate human intelligence. And so any aspect, symbolic AI tried to imitate logic. It's all about putting logical rules together. Machine learning imitates not so much a feature of intelligence as a process, but it tries to imitate the structure, the processing hardware structure of the human brain. So it's called AI. But listen, one thing people should understand about AI, it's always been aspirational. The way it works, if somebody gets an idea about what they think might work, and it's going to be AI, so they write some software, and sometimes it has some interesting results or not.
Right.
But it doesn't start talking, and it doesn't start becoming intelligence. It doesn't, you can't have a conversation with it. It doesn't have comprehension of language. But they don't stop calling it AI, do they?
No, I've always found it fascinating. Like Alexa and Siri are probably the largest deployments of AI that the humans know about today, at least the masses, right? There's probably some stuff in the government that we don't even know about yet. And to me, it's just, either it's reading a Google search, or it's a complex string of if, this, thens.
It's
right?
a text-based. Typical chatbots are just, this is,
Yeah, and I scratch my head. I'm like, well, that's definitely augmented intelligence, right? Humans type that in, but it's not. It doesn't really capture the nuance of what it is to be conscious or have a consciousness.
Right.
That's thought.
That's where the rubber meets the road, right? I mean, that's what we intuitively mean by intelligence. And if you want to get precise about it, which we've done at New Sapiens, we say that intelligence is a bunch of information processing routines that produce a particular product, which is knowledge.
Right.
I mean, knowledge of the world, right? That's the difference.
Point now to where they're taking machine learning and it's writing its own if this thens, right? So that truly could be a loop of its own consciousness, I guess.
No, they're just mimicking patterns. They're not conscious, and they're not doing anything creative or innovative. Right. They've just been trained on a whole bunch of other code, and now they're duplicating patterns they found there. And and like those language models, they don't understand a word they're saying. It's kind of eerie that they can produce text that you read and it's intelligible because the vocabulary and the ordering of the words and the syntax is all intelligible by human beings.
Right.
But think how bizarre that is.
Right.
It's bizarre because in humans, language is a communications protocol, right? I start with an idea, and I want to create a reasonable facsimile of that idea in your head. So I go through the process. I take my idea and I break it down into simpler component ideas that I think you already have in your head, and I attach words to them, and I do a syntactical encoding, which kind of tells you how you're supposed to take the ideas out of your idea warehouse in your head and put them together to create the idea that I want you to have. So that's communications.
Correct.
With these language models, there's no communication. Okay, there's no thought that was desired to be communicated. It's just statistically spitting out. You give it a specification for a pattern, and it spits out patterns. So it's not communication, and it doesn't read. I mean, one of the guys at I think it was OpenAI said, "Yes, we now have these programs which process text at human levels of performance." And I go, "What? Human levels? Humans don't process text. We read it. We write it. It's an entirely different process to what they do."
Well, computers have been processing text faster than humans for decades.
Yeah.
Right?
What he should have said is they produce text that it gives a very convincing illusion that a human wrote it. Okay, so
correct. I use them all the time, right? I use them on a regular basis, right? To write email strings, to write subject lines, all that stuff. I'm not that creative, so I use an AI bot. It's actually, I think it's called Jasper, and I'll throw the link in there for people to use. Right?
I regard these as kind of superior style checkers or syntax checkers, or I think that I think they're fine so long as you start with an idea and you put stuff in and you get stuff out and you said, yeah, that is my idea, except it's maybe saying it quicker or better than I would have said it, or it's to save me time to get it out. Fine, okay, but the communication is from you, the user of the tool, to the people who are reading your words. I think that the cases where people create these things and just throw them out there, I think there's real problems with that. I think it's scary. If you ask me, I think that machine generated text ought to come with like a warning, like they put on cigarette packs. Caution! This language was generated by a machine algorithm that had no idea what it was talking about. Because they don't compare.
It was given an input, and it gave a specific output based on that input.
Yeah. So what do I think AI is? I think it's been nothing but an aspiration until now. Until I think that what we're doing at New Sapience is finally something that it is reasonable to say, yeah, that's intelligence. But we came about it through an entirely different way.
Thanks for watching today's episode of Clicks and Bricks. Get to work.